Greetings, YouTube. Last night at work, I found myself thinking about the Mutant Epoch, a post-apocalyptic game I reviewed here on this channel. And in the game, they bring up the idea that if you have multiple attacks, instead of doing them separately, you could roll them into one attack with a much greater bonus to hit that does more damage. Now, of course, you'd only get one attack, so if you miss, you miss. But, you know, it's a good gamble if you have 3 attacks and they're all going to give you like a significant bonus. Of course, you could roll really low on damage too, so you know, it's the kind of thing you have to make a judgment call on. And when I read the rule, I was stunned that I'd never thought of it myself. I'm like, duh! So, Mr. McAuslin, thank you for that. You have shown that I really should have thought deeper about this kind of thing in the past. So, I found myself trying to think, how would that apply to Pathfinder or 3.5 D&D? And I thought, well, if you roll them all into one attack, monsters that have like 3 attacks, then that would be pretty much exactly a translation of what Mr. McAuslin was discussing for the Mutant Epoch. But player characters, particularly the full BAB fighters, can have 4 attacks. So how would that work? You know, a fighter at 20th level, he has 4 attacks. If you were to combine all of them together into one bonus, that would be a plus 50. Then I'm like, yeah, that's interesting. But you know, that's going to be like critical hits, and you got power attack. And then something occurred to me. Let's get rid of them. Let's completely toss power attacks and critical hits. Whew, gone. So, what you have is an ability to do a bunch of damage, but only usable by people who have multiple attacks. This would reflect that critical hits, or I'm going to be using the term power attack, since the feat's gone, might as well reuse the term, are fairly rare and only done by people who have a lot of training. This would mean that people that don't have multiple attacks, low-level monsters, low-level characters, NPCs, things like that, won't be making these kinds of attacks. And since there are no more critical hits, they're not going to be doing huge amounts of damage. It also means that monsters of the middle-end levels would be able to roll all of their attacks into one, within reason. You have to be able to bring them to bear onto a single target, for example. So a claw bite would be completely acceptable, as would a bite, you know, hoof or something like that. But you know, maybe not. You couldn't throw the rear rend into it at the same time, unless for some reason you could justify a tiger leaping into the air and landing on someone. I guess that might work, but it would be a judgment call by the GM. But it means that those kind of middle-end level monsters would have more legs. They would be a credible threat into higher levels. So you wouldn't have to be bringing out more and newer monsters. You could be able to continue using the ones in your game if you so choose. Now, because you're doing away with critical hits completely with this idea, there's a whole lot of feats that are gone. Obviously, anything that has power attack as a feat as a prerequisite doesn't need it anymore, which is fine by me. You can take Cleave. You would need Cleave, of course, if you wanted to take Great Cleave. And all the other feats that were based off of power attack, the power attack feat, now wouldn't be. They would just be a feat of their own, based on a feat of the previous type. For example, Improved Bull Rush would be required if you had a better Bull Rush, you know, feat after that one. And I wouldn't necessarily require the fighter to use all of them. For example, say he's got 4 attacks and he decides to split them up to 2 attacks. He's got, say, 2 medium-level bosses he's dealing with in a fight. So he has 1 attack on the first one at a plus 35, and 1 attack on the second one at a plus 15. And he's probably going to land with that first blow, all right? And he has a better chance of landing with that second blow than he would have, say, on that fourth or the third or fourth attack with a normal progression. Now, the critical hit criteria would still apply to attacks. For example, you would be able to roll weapon damage. So you had a 2-handed sword, you get to roll, and you roll all of them into one, so you have all 4 attacks into one. You'd be able to roll that 4 times, but you wouldn't multiply precise damage, and you wouldn't add in additional weapon damage from like fiery burst or something like that. As far as the critical multipliers that weapons have, I would just have that be a flat bonus to damage for a power attack. So if your weapon normally has a plus a times 2, it would just be a plus 2 damage, which would be applied to every one of those rolls that you just made. If you're using a pick, which is a multiple of 4, it would still get a bonus over a weapon that isn't as good at penetrating someone's armor, but it wouldn't be as big. It's flattening things out slightly. Now, this is an idea that I've completely thrown out here. I have not play tested this. I thought of this at work last night. I just wanted to bring it up and throw it out there and see if anyone thought that it had any kind of legs whatsoever. Or am I, completely insane here? But I would like to hear what people have to say. Have they done something similar? Have they gotten rid of critical hits in their games? Have they eliminated, the power attack feat? We've discussed house rules that dealt with attack of opportunities last year somewhat extensively. So I thought maybe this is an opportunity to discuss the critical hits, which can be very problematic, particularly at low levels. And the power attack feat, which I've never really liked, to tell you the truth. I especially don't like the fact that it was always a prerequisite for so many other things. I can understand stacking feats that are related to each other directly, like 2-weapon fighting and improved 2-weapon fighting. Makes perfect sense that you need the first before you get the second. No argument. But I don't necessarily why you have to have power attack to get cleave. Cleave is a style of combat where you're really good at hitting multiple targets, or 2 targets in case of cleave, and with greater cleave, multiple targets. And to me, that doesn't necessarily require that I have to do the math juggling that power attack requires. I've never liked that math juggling thing that power attack offered you as an option. It was something that I would never ever do as a player, so it was meant that I would never going to be using cleave or great cleave, which are feats that I might purchase for a character. So divorcing them, I think, leaves new options available to the players out there. So I want to know, do you think this idea is decent at all, or have I just been suffering from sleep deprivation?